White heavy checkmark disclaimer. This story is a fictionalized account inspired by real-life public figures and rumored paranormal events. The character of Toyah Willcox is used in a dramatic narrative context and does not reflect her actual experiences, beliefs, or statements. All supernatural elements are purely imaginative and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real events, locations, or individuals, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Toyah Willcox had always been fascinated by the theatrical world's mystical atmosphere, the grandeur of old velvet curtains, the echo of applause in centuries-old auditoriums, and the silent whispers trapped between dressing room walls. When she received an invitation to perform a one-night-only acoustic set at the Greystone Theatre, a Victorian-era stage nestled in the quiet hills of Derbyshire, she was intrigued. Known for its majestic but decaying architecture, Greystone carried a hushed reputation in certain artistic circles, beautiful but cursed. Toyah dismissed the rumors. A seasoned performer, she believed no ghost story could unsettle her. Besides, the thought of singing on a stage with such a long, rich history excited her. Arriving at the theater 2 days before the event, Toyah was immediately struck by its eerie presence. The building's stone facade loomed like a relic of another time, darkened by age and soot. Inside, the air was unusually cold. Dust floated visibly in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight, and the distant creak of floorboards seemed to move without cause. She was greeted by the theater's caretaker, Mr. Harold, a gaunt, soft-spoken man in his 70s. He spoke with quiet reverence about the building's personality, warning her gently to be respectful of what came before. Toyah laughed off his comments, assuming he was simply trying to add theatrical flair. But that night, during her first walk through the backstage area, she began to notice strange things. The scent of old perfume lingered in her dressing room, floral and sharp, like a Victorian blend she'd never smelled before. A mirror, tarnished with age, seemed to flicker with movement in her peripheral vision. She told herself it was just her mind playing tricks in a new environment. Still, something about the space made her feel watched. By the second day, things took a more unsettling turn. During sound check, a sudden blast of cold air swept through the auditorium, extinguishing several candles along the walls. The stage lights flickered despite the building's updated electrical wiring. Her microphone emitted a low growl instead of feedback. The sound technician tried to reassure her that it was just an old system, but the entire crew was on edge. They moved more quietly now, whispering instead of speaking. One young assistant refused to return to the green room alone, claiming she saw someone standing there who vanished when she blinked. Despite the unease settling over the venue, Toyah remained committed to the performance. She tried to keep spirits high and encouraged the crew not to give in to superstition. Still, the heavy atmosphere followed her everywhere, especially when she was alone. That evening, rehearsing in the empty auditorium, she swore she saw a woman in the upper balcony dressed in an old-fashioned gown, watching her silently. When she looked again, the figure was gone. Toyah confided in her bandmate, who dismissed it as stress-induced hallucination. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The deeper she explored the venue, the more drawn she felt to it, almost as though the theater was breathing around her. Every corridor seemed to echo with unseen footsteps. She found herself humming old songs she didn't remember learning, melodies she couldn't place. In her dressing room, she discovered a faded program from 1886 tucked behind the mirror, featuring the name Eliza Claymore, a lead actress in a play titled The Swan's Curse. That name would soon become more than a curiosity. It would become a haunting. Toyah felt something in her gut, a sense that her arrival at Greystone wasn't random. It was as if something or someone had been waiting. The invitation had seemed ordinary at first, a professional opportunity like many others. But Greystone Theatre had a will of its own. And Toyah, for all her bravado and experience, was about to become part of a ghost story that hadn't finished telling itself. The following morning, Toyah awoke feeling oddly drained, as though she hadn't slept at all. Her limbs ached, and her throat felt tight. Not from illness, but from something heavier, unspoken. She chalked it up to nerves. But when she reached for her phone, she found it lying across the room, face down on the wooden floor. She was certain she had left it charging beside the bed. Her overnight bag had also been moved slightly, unzipped. Nothing was missing, but nothing was quite right. Rehearsals resumed after breakfast, but the air inside the theater felt heavier than before. A dense, invisible pressure settled across the stage. Toyah noticed her bandmates behaving oddly, muddling simple chords, forgetting lyrics they'd rehearsed for weeks. Tensions rose. The sound tech snapped at the lighting crew and 2 dancers quit the show without explanation. One of them claimed, in a shaky voice, that she felt cold fingers on her neck while standing alone in the wings. Toyah began to feel her own sense of reality slip in small, jarring ways. While practicing her set list in the green room, she heard her name whispered, low, urgent, and right behind her. Spinning around, she found no one. The walls were lined with aging portraits of actors long gone, their eyes seeming to follow her wherever she moved. The feeling of being watched intensified. Her reflection in the mirror sometimes blinked a second too late, lagging unnaturally behind her real movements. That evening, after the crew left for dinner, Toyah stayed behind to fine-tune a solo piece. The stage was lit only by ghost lights, dim, eerie bulbs left on in theaters to ward off spirits. As she strummed her guitar and sang softly, she heard footsteps cross the empty auditorium. Not the slow, echoing creaks of a building settling, but distinct steps, measured, deliberate. She froze. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. Then she saw it. A fleeting shadow in the upper balcony, just like the night before. This time, the figure didn't vanish instantly. It lingered, cloaked in darkness, as though listening. Toyah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move. The figure lifted a hand, delicate, pale, and oddly graceful, and pointed at her. Not in anger, not in warning, but in recognition. The next few days were a blur of surreal experiences. Lights flickering with no electrical cause. Stage props falling without reason. And Toyah herself began losing time. Her assistant, Claire, found her standing barefoot on stage at 3 a.m., eyes closed, softly singing a lullaby no one recognized. When Claire woke her, Toyah had no memory of how she got there. Her personality also began to shift. Toyah, usually warm and grounded, became distant, sometimes cold. She wore vintage clothing that hadn't been part of her wardrobe before. She insisted on using a specific lipstick color, a dark crimson shade nearly identical to the one worn in an old photograph of Eliza Claymore, discovered in the archives by a curious technician. Even her accent seemed to change slightly during rehearsals, adopting an older cadence, almost theatrical. People noticed. Claire tried to confront her gently, but Toyah laughed it off. "I just feel inspired," she said, voice husky. "As though someone is helping me bring something real to the stage." But it wasn't inspiration. It was invasion. The whispers intensified. They no longer faded with daylight. Toyah heard them in the shower, in the hall, in her sleep. She began writing in a strange cursive style, leaving notes she couldn't remember composing. The messages grew darker. "The curtain must rise," one read. Another simply said, "Let me finish what I began." In one particularly disturbing incident, Toyah stood before her dressing room mirror, humming a sorrowful melody. Claire entered and gasped. Toyah's reflection wasn't moving in sync. It stood perfectly still, smiling faintly, even as Toyah herself turned to greet her. When Claire looked back at the mirror, the smile vanished. More crew members quit. The stage manager begged Toyah to cancel the show. But Toyah refused. "This performance matters," she insisted, her eyes glassy. "It's bigger than all of us." She was right. Something had begun that couldn't be undone. The whispers had turned to voices. The shadows had begun to take form. And the line between Toyah Willcox and Eliza Claymore was fading fast. By the 4th night in Greystone Theater, Toyah Willcox was no longer just a guest performer. She had become part of the building's living history. But not in the way anyone expected. Her behavior had begun to tip into something far stranger than eccentricity. It was as if she were two people at once, flickering between her usual self and a haunted, unfamiliar version that spoke in riddles and stared into spaces no one else could see. The change wasn't subtle. During a rehearsal of her acoustic ballad, she suddenly stopped mid-verse and began muttering to herself. Her eyes rolled back for a brief second, and when they returned, she sang a completely different melody, one that no one recognized but sounded distinctly old, tragic, and full of longing. Her bandmates froze, confused. Toyah seemed unaware that anything had gone wrong. When asked later, she shrugged. "I just felt it," she said, like the song was already in me. Soon, she stopped remembering large chunks of her day. She would lose time in the middle of conversations or find herself in different parts of the theater without any recollection of how she got there. Claire began keeping a diary documenting the strange occurrences. One entry read, Toyah was standing barefoot in the West Wing hallway again. Third time this week. Said she was following the girl in the red dress. There is no girl in red. One night, Toyah's reflection began whispering to her. In the dim candlelight of her dressing room, she saw her mirrored self mouthing words she couldn't hear. Leaning closer, she finally caught the phrase, she never got to finish the play. Then the reflection smiled, though her real face remained still. That smile was not her own. After that, the physical changes began. Her voice, normally soft and melodic, would occasionally break into an older tone, deeper and clipped, as if shaped by a long-forgotten dialect. Her handwriting changed completely. Notes left on her vanity table were no longer in Toyah's hand, but written in neat, looping cursive. They spoke of pain, betrayal, unfinished stories, and a name repeated over and over again, Eliza Claymore. Some crew members grew frightened. A stagehand swore he saw Toyah arguing with someone in the hallway, but when he approached, there was no one there. She had been shouting at the empty air. Others reported hearing footsteps overhead when no one was upstairs or catching a glimpse of a figure dressed in tattered white watching them from the rafters. But the most alarming report came from the lead lighting technician who claimed he saw two Toyahs, one standing in the orchestra pit and another watching silently from the balcony. The caretaker, Mr. Harold, who had seen many strange things in his decades at Greystone, finally stepped forward. He told Claire and the rest of the crew about the legend of Eliza Claymore, an actress who performed her final show at Greystone in 1886. On the night of her most anticipated role, she was humiliated by a jealous rival and stormed offstage, never to be seen again. Her body was never found. Some believed she took her own life in the dressing room. Others said she vanished into the walls of the theater, consumed by her shame and unfulfilled dream. Toyah, he claimed, bore an uncanny resemblance to Eliza. And now Eliza's spirit, long dormant, had found a vessel. By the week's end, Toyah had become obsessed with Eliza's life. She demanded scripts of her old plays, requested period costumes, and even refused to rehearse modern songs, preferring instead to perform soliloquies in Old English verse. She spent hours alone on stage, moving as if in a trance, mimicking gestures no one had taught her. Claire, frightened and desperate, called a spiritual consultant, someone who specialized in possession cases. When the medium arrived and entered the theater, she immediately shuddered. There's something living inside her, she whispered. It's not demonic. It's human. But it's angry. It's unfinished. The possession wasn't violent yet, but it was deepening. Eliza Claymore was no longer a presence clinging to the shadows. She was stepping forward, inch by inch, using Toyah's body as her own. And Toyah? Somewhere deep inside, she was starting to fade. Claire sat in the back row of the auditorium, watching Toyah glide across the stage like someone rehearsing a scene only she could see. The woman in front of her was no longer the vibrant, playful, grounded performer she had known for years. There was an elegance to her movements now, an eerie grace, as though she had rehearsed on this very stage long before she was born. Toyah recited lines from an unknown play, words that sounded Victorian in tone, rich in despair and longing. But none of them were part of her scheduled performance. Determined to understand what was happening, Claire returned to Mr. Harold, the caretaker. The old man sighed heavily, as though he had been waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. He took her deep into the archive room beneath the theater, where moldering playbills, scripts, and forgotten photographs lay in dusty boxes. He pulled out a faded portrait, a young woman in a flowing stage gown, her hair curled just like Toyah's, her eyes haunting and familiar. Below it was the name, Eliza Claymore. Mr. Harold explained what the staff and locals whispered about but rarely admitted out loud. Eliza had been a rising star in 1886, a talented, magnetic actress who had captured the attention of everyone in London's upper theatrical circles. But Greystone Theatre was her undoing. She had come here to headline The Swan's Curse, a tragic play written especially for her. On opening night, after months of promotion, her understudy, jealous and power-hungry, sabotaged her costume and smeared her name among critics before the curtain rose. Eliza never got to perform. Her final act was humiliation. After that night, she vanished without a trace. Some believed she drowned herself in the nearby river. Others whispered she had been lured into a backroom of the theater and murdered. No one ever found her body, and no performance ever felt quite the same in Greystone again. Audiences dwindled. Staff quit. Shadows stretched longer. And some said that if you stood alone on the stage and listened closely, you could hear a woman weeping behind the curtain. As Claire pieced the story together, she realized that Toyah's experiences mirrored Eliza's tragedy too closely to be coincidence. The melodies she hummed matched lyrics found in Eliza's unfinished play. The costume pieces Toyah suddenly requested resembled Eliza's last known wardrobe. Even her handwriting had begun to resemble Eliza's notes found in the theater's archives. That night, Claire confronted Toyah gently. She brought her the old photograph of Eliza. At first, Toyah laughed it off, but her smile faded as she stared into Eliza's eyes. "She's familiar," Toyah whispered. "I've seen her in my dreams. She sings to me." Claire showed her the original script of the Swan's Curse. As Toyah touched the yellowed pages, her fingers trembled. She turned each page slowly as if revisiting something personal. Her voice cracked when she reached the final scene, one that had never been performed. "She didn't get to say these words," Toyah said softly. "She was silenced." Claire's heart pounded. "Toyah, you're not just channeling her. I think she's trying to live through you." Toyah didn't deny it. Instead, she looked up and said something chilling. "Maybe that's the only way she'll ever be heard." The medium returned the next evening, performing a quiet ritual in Toyah's dressing room. The air turned ice cold. The mirror fogged from within. The medium reached out and placed her hand on Toyah's forehead. Almost instantly, Toyah's body stiffened and her voice shifted again, lower, controlled, theatrical. "Eliza is here," the medium said. "She's not evil. She's desperate. She's been trapped here for more than a century, screaming into the void. And now she sees a second chance." Claire asked what Eliza wanted. "She wants to finish the story," the medium replied. "To perform her final scene. To be remembered for her voice, not her silence. If she doesn't, she won't leave." Toyah sat silently as this was said, but a single tear rolled down her cheek. It was unclear if it belonged to Toyah or Eliza. The performance had taken on new meaning. It was no longer a simple concert. It had become a stage for resurrection, a chance for an old, broken soul to reclaim what was taken from her. But would Eliza leave once her curtain call came? Or would she decide Toyah's body was far more than just a vessel, it was a second life? The night of the performance arrived and Greystone Theater was packed for the first time in decades. The buzz surrounding Toyah Willcox's appearance had brought in both fans and skeptics alike, some eager for music, others curious about the rumors swirling through town. Whispers of strange rehearsals, disappearing staff, and ghost sightings had made their way into the local press, turning the event into something more than just a concert. It felt like a reckoning. Backstage, Toyah prepared in near silence. Her makeup was minimal, but she had insisted on wearing a flowing ivory gown almost identical to one worn by Eliza Claymore in the 1886 portrait. Her eyes looked distant, fixed somewhere beyond the walls. Claire tried to talk to her, to reach the Toyah she knew, but her friend only nodded slowly and said, "Tonight, I have to give her the ending she was denied." The curtain rose to polite applause. Toyah stepped into the spotlight, her guitar in hand. First, everything seemed normal. She sang the opening number with practiced ease, her voice gentle and rich. But as she transitioned into her second song, something shifted. Her fingers faltered. The melody wavered. The audience stirred, sensing something was off. Toyah's breathing grew ragged. Her eyes fluttered. Then, without warning, she dropped her guitar to the floor with a sharp clatter and fell to her knees. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Stage crew rushed forward, but Toyah suddenly stood upright, rigid, eyes wide. Then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. The accent was old, refined, Victorian. Her diction crisp. She launched into a monologue that no one recognized, her voice ringing through the hall with power and tragedy. It was a theatrical performance, haunting, beautiful, and deeply emotional. The words were poetic, filled with sorrow, longing, and betrayal. Lines like, "They stole my voice, but they will hear my scream," and "What is a life if not the story left unfinished?" stunned the audience into silence. Unbeknownst to them, she was delivering the final scene of The Swan's Curse, a script lost to time, never performed. Claire, watching from the wings, recognized it from the fragments she had seen in the archives. Her heart pounded. It was Eliza. She had taken the stage. The lights above dimmed suddenly as though responding to an unseen cue. A low hum resonated through the old wooden walls. Some in the crowd began to look nervous. A few stood up to leave but couldn't. The heavy theater doors had slammed shut. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "Toyah, no," Eliza continued with the monologue, her face tear-streaked but radiant with passion. She held out her arms, voice quivering with sorrow. "Let them remember me not for my vanishing, but for my voice." As the final words echoed into the silence, the temperature in the room plummeted. A visible mist rolled across the stage floor. Toyah staggered back, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into Claire's arms, who had rushed to her side. The theater fell into chaos. The audience stood stunned, many unsure if what they had witnessed was part of the act or something much more unearthly. Emergency lights flickered on, but nothing could break the feeling that something had just left the building. Backstage, Toyah lay unconscious. Her pulse was steady but faint. When she awoke nearly an hour later, her voice was hoarse, her memory blank. "Did I finish the show?" she asked. Claire could only nod, tears in her eyes. "She finished it," Claire whispered back. "She finally did." That night, recordings of the breakdown went viral. Viewers all over the world were captivated by Toyah's mysterious performance and the strange energy that seemed to permeate the footage. But those who had been inside Greystone knew that wasn't acting. That wasn't Toyah. That was Eliza Claymore finally stepping into her spotlight for the first and last time. After the harrowing night at Greystone Theater, Toyah was escorted back to her temporary lodging with Claire and 2 shaken staff members. Though physically unharmed, she was emotionally hollow, her voice weak, her eyes distant as if they'd seen something not meant for the living. Word of the incident spread quickly across media platforms, some calling it a powerful artistic expression, others labeling it a spiritual possession caught live on stage. But Claire knew better. She had felt it in the cold air, heard it in Toyah's unnatural voice, watched her speak words lost for over a century. The next morning, Claire made an urgent call to the medium who had previously sensed Eliza's presence. Her name was Marion Holt, a well-respected spiritual consultant known for aiding artists who experienced creative disturbances bordering on the supernatural. Marion arrived within hours, her presence calm and grounded, contrasting with the nervous chaos lingering in Toyah's room. As Marion entered the space, she immediately paused at the threshold, her hand tightening around the beaded necklace at her throat. "She's still here," she murmured. "Not inside the walls. Inside her." Toyah was seated on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out the window like someone waiting for a storm to pass. When Marion approached, Toyah didn't speak at first. Instead, she slowly turned, tears forming in her eyes. "She's quieter now," she whispered. "But I can still feel her inside my chest, like a song humming under my heartbeat." Marion set up a circle of protection with candles, salt, and crystals, and asked everyone to remain silent. She placed her hand gently over Toyah's forehead, then closed her eyes. The room grew unnaturally cold. The flame of each candle flickered violently, despite the absence of wind. Then Marion began to chant in a soft, rhythmic tone, her voice pulling something forward, something that had been hiding just beneath the surface. Toyah's body jerked once. Her breathing slowed. Then, her eyes fluttered open. Only they didn't seem like her eyes anymore. Her posture straightened. Her voice dropped in pitch. "She left me," the voice said. "Left me to rot behind velvet and stone." Claire gasped. It was the same voice from the stage. "Eliza." Marion remained composed. "Eliza," she said gently. "Why have you returned?" "To speak," Eliza's voice answered. "To perform. To be seen." "You had your chance," Marion said. The curtain fell. "It's time to rest." "No," Eliza snapped. "They stole my final moment. They erased my soul. Now I have hers. I need it to finish what was taken." Claire stepped forward, trembling. "But you already did. The audience heard you. They felt you." Eliza paused. Her expression softened. "They did." "Yes," Claire said, voice breaking. "They finally heard your story. They finally knew your pain. You got your standing ovation, Eliza." Tears rolled down Toyah's cheeks, hers or Eliza's, no one could tell. Marion held Toyah's hands now, whispering prayers meant to release a spirit from the body it inhabited. The candles dimmed. The air grew dense. And then, slowly, the room lightened, like a weight being lifted. Toyah collapsed forward, unconscious but breathing. Marion leaned over her, murmuring, "She's gone, for now." But her expression wasn't peaceful. It was troubled. Later, Marion pulled Claire aside. Spirits like Eliza don't just vanish. They cling to emotion, the unfinished, the unresolved. This wasn't an exorcism, it was a negotiation. If she believes she's been heard, she may sleep. But if Toyah performs again, especially in that theater, Claire nodded, understanding. She might come back. Toyah awoke with no memory of the seance, but she looked lighter, her voice clearer, her laugh returning in small bursts. She asked Claire about the performance, and when she was told what happened, she fell silent for a long time. Then I gave her something, she finally said. Maybe she gave me something too. That night, Toyah sat alone with her guitar, playing a new melody. One she didn't remember writing, but felt like it had always lived somewhere deep inside her. The theater had gone quiet. But the story? It wasn't quite finished. A week passed, and though Toyah had regained her strength, something within her remained unsettled. She no longer heard the whispers. She no longer spoke in strange tones. But she often caught herself staring at her reflection for too long, lost in thought, as if waiting for someone else to appear behind the glass. Her dreams were full of velvet curtains, candlelit stages, and voices calling from the shadows. Eliza was gone, but not forgotten. Not by Toyah, and not by the theater. Marion Holt's warning weighed heavily on Claire's mind. If Toyah performs again, especially in that theater, Eliza might return. But Toyah had made a decision. She needed to return, not to perform, but to bring closure to herself and the spirit that had once shared her soul. With Marion's guidance, Claire and Toyah arranged one final night at Greystone Theater. There would be no audience this time. Only a few trusted people would attend. Marion, Claire, the caretaker Mr. Harold, and a psychic historian named Lydia who had studied Eliza Claymore for years. The plan was simple. Recreate the final performance Eliza had been denied. From her costume to her forgotten monologue, every detail would be honored. They believed it was the only way to release Eliza completely. As dusk fell and shadows stretched long across the theater walls, the group gathered inside. Toyah stepped into Eliza's gown one last time, white silk with lace sleeves restored from a design sketched in Eliza's own handwriting. Her hair was styled in loose curls. Her lips painted in the same deep crimson shade Eliza had once favored. She looked like a ghost reborn. Standing center stage under a single spotlight, Toyah whispered, "I'm not afraid of her anymore." Marion led a protective ritual, encircling the stage in sea salt and candles. Lydia placed Eliza's original script, preserved and pieced together over time, on a wooden pedestal at the edge of the stage. "She needs to hear the applause," Lydia said quietly. "Even if it's only from the dead." Toyah began the monologue, speaking the words Eliza had never been allowed to deliver. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, something in the room shifted. The air thickened, charged with emotion. The old floorboards groaned softly as if awakening to memory. Her words were aching with beauty and pain. "They stitched silence into my seams, but the thread has unraveled. Now let the curtain rise for the woman they buried beneath shame." Claire watched from the wings, heart pounding. Marion's eyes remained closed, lips moving in prayer. Suddenly, the theater responded, the chandeliers swayed, the candles flickered violently. A cold gust swept through the aisles. And then, for a moment, a second voice joined Toyah's. It was faint, overlapping hers, not in conflict, but in harmony. A double-layered tone, like a whisper dancing with the wind. "Eliza." Toyah didn't pause. She let the voice come. Let it share her body. One last time. Together, they reached the monologue's final line, "I was born for the stage, and now I exit on my own terms." The spotlight faded. The room fell silent. And then, a breeze. Gentle. Warm. The candles steadied. The temperature rose. Claire saw at first a shimmer of light at the edge of the stage, like morning sunlight caught in fog. It held shape for only a second. A woman. Smiling. Then gone. Toyah stood, eyes wet, but peaceful. "She's gone," she whispered. "Really gone." Marion nodded solemnly. She finished her story. And now she can rest. The group left the theater quietly, the silence no longer oppressive but sacred. Toyah looked back one last time before the doors closed behind her. The building no longer felt like a trap, but a tomb, a monument to a woman who refused to be forgotten. Outside, stars stretched across the sky. Toyah took Claire's hand. "It's strange," she said. "I thought I was helping her. But maybe she helped me. Helped me remember why I chose the stage. To be seen. To speak truth. To matter." Claire smiled. "You did all of that. And you gave Eliza her voice back." For the first time in weeks, Toyah laughed. A real, unburdened laugh. The curtain had finally fallen. But the echoes of Eliza Claymore's final performance would remain in the wood, in the walls, and in the soul of every woman who had ever been silenced. Months passed. The story of Toyah Willcox's chilling performance and the spirit of Eliza Claymore became a phenomenon not just in the entertainment world but across paranormal circles, spiritual communities, and late-night talk shows. Journalists scrambled to piece together fact from fiction. Podcasts speculated endlessly. Some insisted it was an elaborate artistic stunt. Others believed Toyah had truly been possessed by the soul of a forgotten actress. But Toyah herself remained quiet until she was ready to speak. Her first public interview was emotional and raw. Sitting opposite a well-known broadcaster on a primetime program, Toyah recounted her experience carefully, not as a victim, but as a witness to something far older and more tragic than she had ever imagined. She didn't claim to be an expert in the supernatural. She didn't try to convince anyone of what had happened. She simply told the truth. They declared the site spiritually saturated, not in fear, but in reverence. A small plaque was mounted outside the main entrance. Here, Eliza Claymore took her final bow. Toyah went on to write a memoir titled The Curtain Between, blending her personal life, musical journey, and the strange events of that haunted engagement. The book climbed bestseller charts within weeks. Readers were captivated not just by the ghost story but by the human one of a woman who had confronted darkness both from the past and within herself and emerged stronger. But Toyah had changed. Spiritually, emotionally, even artistically. She began performing again, but never in massive arenas or glitzy venues. Instead, she chose intimate spaces, small theaters, old churches, candlelit halls. Her songs shifted in tone, carrying themes of memory, loss, redemption, and the presence of the unseen. Her voice held new depth. Audiences said she sang like someone who had heard voices beyond the grave and answered them with music. Claire stayed by her side, now not just an assistant but a close friend and creative partner. Together, they launched a program for women in theater called The Unfinished Voice, helping new actresses, especially those from overlooked backgrounds, find their own place on stage. Toyah always said the idea came from Eliza. Occasionally, Toyah would receive letters from others artists who claimed to have experienced something similar, forgotten songs in their heads, voices echoing in rehearsal halls, strange inspiration from unknown sources. She replied to everyone, gently encouraging them to listen carefully but protect themselves. One autumn evening, Toyah stood outside her countryside cottage looking up at the sky. She still sometimes dreamed of the gray stone theater, the dusty velvet, the cold marble floors, the echo of footsteps in the wings. But in her dreams now, Eliza didn't cry. She smiled. She stood in the spotlight, bowing deeply, grateful. And though the world had moved on from the sensational headlines, those who had been there, those who had felt the air go still, seen the candles bend inward, heard two voices in one body would never forget. Toyah no longer feared the unknown. She had shared her soul with a ghost, faced the weight of a forgotten story, and lived to sing about it. She had become a bridge between the living and the lost, the silent and the heard, the curtain and what lies just beyond. The haunting was over, but the memory would remain forever woven into her voice. 61.